The sun was setting over Oakwood Heights, painting the rows of identical houses in shades of orange and gold. Most homeowners were winding down after a long day, but not Diane Prescott. She stood in her living room, rehearsing the speech she planned to deliver at tonight's HOA meeting. At 62, with her perfectly styled gray bob and designer pantsuits, Diane had transformed from a feared corporate executive to an even more feared neighborhood watchdog. Rules exist for a reason, she muttered to herself, straightening a picture frame that was already perfectly aligned. Her home was a showcase of precision, not a pillow out of place, not a speck of dust to be found. She'd worked hard for this perfection, and she expected her neighbors to maintain the same standards. That evening, the community center buzzed with reluctant homeowners who knew that skipping an HOA meeting meant risking Diane's special attention. Tom Henderson and his wife sat near the back, their elderly toy poodle Muffin tucked into a small carrier. The dog had been coming to these meetings for years without issue. Before we begin, I'd like to remind everyone that pets are tolerated at these meetings only if they remain silent and controlled, Diane announced, eyeing the Hendersons with thinly veiled disapproval. Halfway through Diane's presentation about improper mailbox heights, a small commotion erupted from the back. Mrs. Henderson gasped as Muffin, who had somehow escaped her carrier, trotted down the center aisle. Before anyone could react, the tiny dog squatted and left a small puddle on the community center's beige carpet. The room fell silent. Everyone turned to Diane, whose face had turned an alarming shade of red. "I'm so sorry," Mrs. Henderson stammered, rushing to clean up with tissues from her purse. She's never done this before. She's 14 years old and sometimes can't hold it like she used to. Diane's voice cut through the room like ice. "This is exactly why animals do not belong in civilized settings. Look at this disgusting mess. This floor was professionally cleaned just last week with money from our dues." The meeting continued, but neighbors noticed how Diane kept glancing at the clean spot on the carpet, her jaw tight with anger. For the next 2 weeks, the incident was all she talked about when inspecting lawns or measuring fence heights around the neighborhood. Then came the emergency meeting notice, slipped under every door in Oakwood Heights. Attendance was mandatory. A Diane specialty that wasn't actually enforceable but scared enough people into showing up. The community center was packed that Tuesday evening. Diane stood at the podium, a thick binder open before her. "After careful consideration of property values, cleanliness standards, and community well-being, I've drafted an amendment to our HOA bylaws," she announced. "Effective 30 days from today, no pets of any kind will be permitted within Oakwood Heights." A stunned silence fell across the room, followed by erupting voices. "You can't be serious," called out Joe from the corner house. "My kids' guinea pigs stay in a cage inside our house." "My cat never even goes outside," protested Linda, a quiet woman who rarely spoke at meetings. Diane raised her hand for silence. "The amendment covers all animals: dogs, cats, birds, rodents, reptiles, anything living that isn't a human. The incident at our last meeting proved that even supposedly well-behaved pets create unsanitary conditions. This is about one accident from one elderly dog." Tom Henderson stood up, his voice shaking with anger. "This is about maintaining standards," Diane replied coolly. "Pets damage property, create noise, leave waste, and reduce home values. The board has reviewed my proposal and agrees." What she didn't mention was that the board consisted of her 2 closest friends and her easily intimidated next-door neighbor. The vote was taken with many people still trying to argue, hands half raised in question. Diane moved with practiced efficiency, declaring the amendment passed before most realized what had happened. "You have 30 days to rehome your animals," she announced over the growing upset. After that, violations will incur a daily fine of $100 as permitted in our bylaws for non-compliance issues. As families left the meeting in shocked silence, many with tears in their eyes, they didn't notice the slight smile on Diane's face. She'd wanted this for years. A perfectly clean, perfectly quiet, perfectly controlled neighborhood. What she couldn't possibly know was that her perfect victory was about to attract some very imperfect visitors. The first week after Diane's pet ban announcement passed in a fog of disbelief. Parents struggled to explain to crying children why their furry family members had to leave. Elderly residents who lived alone faced losing their only daily companions. The mood throughout Oakwood Heights grew dark as moving boxes appeared, not for furniture, but for pet beds, toys, and food bowls. James Chen watched this unfold from his kitchen window while absently stroking Winston, his orange tabby cat. At 35, James was quieter than most of his neighbors, preferring the company of his computer code and his cat to neighborhood barbecues. But something about the sadness spreading through the community stirred him to action. It started with a text of his next-door neighbor, Rage, whose daughter was heartbroken about their golden retriever. "Maybe we should check if this vote was even legal," James wrote. Within hours, his living room hosted 5 neighbors speaking in hushed tones, as if Diane might have planted listening devices in the potted plants. "I've read our bylaws cover to cover," said Rage, waving a coffee-stained printout. "Major changes require a 2/3 majority vote with at least 75% of homeowners present." There weren't nearly that many people at the meeting, Linda from across the street pointed out. She hadn't spoken up during the HOA meeting, but found her voice now. Her cockatiel had been her companion for 12 years. By the weekend, what neighbors were calling the Pet Underground had grown to 15 members. They moved their meetings to James's basement, which offered more space and privacy. Winston the cat supervised from atop the washing machine, occasionally meowing as if offering suggestions. "Diane knows exactly what she's doing," explained Tom Henderson, still angry about how his poodle Muffin had unwittingly become the catalyst for the ban. "She schedules these votes when people are at work or on vacation. Most folks don't even know what's happening until it's done." The group began documenting every procedural violation they could find. They photographed meeting minutes, recorded conversations, and built a case against the pet ban's legitimacy. But they faced a problem. Challenging Diane directly would alert her to their resistance, giving her time to cover her tracks. Meanwhile, some residents took different approaches to the crisis. 82-year-old Ethel Simmons, who had outlived her husband by 15 years and her children by 5, point blank, refused to give up her aging cat Mister. "That woman can find me until I'm in my grave," she told James when he checked on her. "Mr. stays." Ethel became unexpectedly crafty, creating hiding spots throughout her small house. When Diane conducted her first compliance inspection, a questionably legal practice she'd instituted years ago, Mr. was tucked inside a hollowed-out ottoman. During the second surprise visit, he was napping in a modified kitchen cabinet with air holes drilled discreetly into the back. The inspections grew more frequent as the 30-day grace period neared its end. Diane seemed to take special pleasure in checking the homes of residents she suspected still harbored animals. She carried a black notebook, recording evidence like stray pet hairs or the faint smell of litter box cleaner. What she didn't know was that each intrusive visit was secretly recorded by increasingly tech-savvy residents using nanny cams and doorbell cameras. The Pet Underground compiled these videos alongside their other evidence. "We need to be smart about this," James told the group during their 4th meeting. More than 30 people now crowded his basement, some sitting on the floor or leaning against the water heater. "If we challenge her and lose, she'll make things even worse." A knock at the basement door silenced the room. Hearts pounded as James cautiously opened it, half expecting to see Diane's disapproving face. Instead, Robert Williams, the neighborhood's only lawyer, stood on the steps. "Sorry I'm late," he whispered, sliding inside. "My wife said you folks might need some legal advice." He held up a thick binder of HOA regulations, and I think I found the fatal flaw in Diane's little dictatorship. The room leaned forward as Robert explained property covenant limitations. For the first time since the ban was announced, hope flickered across worried faces. Winston the cat jumped down from his perch and weaved between legs, purring as if he understood the tide was about to turn. What none of them realized was that nature was about to provide unexpected allies in their fight against Diane Prescott's iron rule. Just 2 miles away, in an abandoned warehouse scheduled for demolition, a colony of feral cats was about to lose their home. The old warehouse on Miller Street had stood empty for nearly a decade, its brick walls slowly crumbling, windows broken by weather and teenage mischief. Few people in town gave it a second thought, except the construction crew that arrived with bulldozers and wrecking balls one Tuesday morning. The property had finally been sold to developers planning to build luxury apartments. What the construction workers didn't expect was the small army of feral cats that had made the warehouse their kingdom. As the machines roared to life and the first wall came crashing down, dark shapes scattered in every direction, cats of all sizes and colors, wild-eyed and frightened, fleeing the only home many of them had ever known. "Must be 20 or 30 of them," the foreman said, scratching his head as he watched the cats disappear into the surrounding areas. "Never seen so many in one place." He made a half-hearted call to animal control, who explained they were already overwhelmed with summer kitten season and couldn't spare resources for feral cats that would likely sort themselves out. With a shrug, the crew returned to work, the cats already forgotten. But the cats hadn't forgotten their survival instincts. For 3 days, they roamed in loose groups, searching for new territory. They followed the scent of food and water, moving steadily toward an area with well-maintained yards, garden sheds, and comfortable spaces beneath decks and porches, the perfectly manicured neighborhood of Oakwood Heights. The first sighting came from Mrs. Lee, who spotted 3 cats slinking along her back fence at dusk. They didn't look like pets, she told James during an emergency pet underground meeting. "These were rough cats, scarred ears, wary eyes. They watched me like I was the intruder." Similar reports trickled in over the next few days. A gray tabby spotted drinking from a bird bath. A pair of black cats sleeping under the community gazebo. A mother cat and 3 half-grown kittens making a home beneath Henry's storage shed. James recognized what was happening before anyone else. He'd volunteered at an animal shelter during college and knew the signs of a feral colony looking for new territory. Unlike house cats, these animals had never known human touch. They were essentially wild animals, clever, resourceful, and extremely difficult to remove once settled. "This could be interesting," he said quietly to Rage as they watched a large orange tomcat surveying the cul-de-sac from atop a fence post. The cat's torn ear and battle-scarred face spoke of years surviving on its own terms. News of the feral cats spread quickly through the neighborhood, but interestingly, not to Diane. Her house sat at the end of a long driveway, partially hidden by perfectly trimmed hedges, and she rarely ventured out except for her inspection rounds. Her self-imposed isolation, once the source of her power, now kept her in the dark. As the days passed, many residents noticed something peculiar. The cats seemed to favor certain yards while completely avoiding others. The Hendersons never saw a single cat, while the Johnson family counted at least 7 different ones using their backyard as a thoroughfare. "They're avoiding houses that smell like dogs used to live there," explained James during a now weekly underground meeting. "Cats are extremely sensitive to scent. Even though our pets are gone, their smells linger around our properties." "So whose house would they be most attracted to?" asked Linda, who was secretly leaving water out for the cats despite the risk of fines. "Someone who never had pets," Robert the lawyer replied, a slow smile spreading across his face. "Someone whose yard has never known the scent of dog or cat or any animal at all." The room fell silent as everyone reached the same conclusion. Ethel, now the group's oldest and most daring member, cackled with delight. "Wouldn't that be just perfect? All those cats finding their way to the one yard in the neighborhood that's never had a pet." Outside, as if summoned by the conversation, the battle-scared orange Tom jumped from the fence and padded silently down the street. He paused at each driveway, sniffing carefully before moving on. When he reached the immaculate property at the end of Maple Drive, he stopped. He tested the air again, whiskers twitching. Something about this place, this house with no competing animal scents, with dense shrubs perfect for hiding, and a decorative pond full of fat, slow-moving fish, called to him. The cat slipped through Diane Prescott's hedge, becoming the first of many uninvited guests about to make her life very, very complicated. It took exactly 3 days for Diane to discover she had unwelcome visitors. She was pruning her prized rose bushes when she noticed several small paw prints in her freshly mulched garden bed. At first, she convinced herself it must be a raccoon or a neighbor's child trespassing. But then she spotted it, a sleek gray cat watching her coolly from beneath her hydrangea bushes. "Shoo, get out of here," she yelled, waving her garden shears. The cat didn't budge, just blinked lazily at her before stretching and disappearing deeper into the foliage. By evening, Diane was on the warpath. She marched up and down the street, knocking on doors, demanding to know whose cat was loose in the neighborhood. All pets were supposed to be gone weeks ago, she reminded each neighbor who answered. Someone is breaking the rules, and I will find out who. What she didn't realize was that no one was breaking her rules, at least not in the way she thought. These weren't escaped pets, they were wild animals that had never been owned by anyone. The very next morning, Diane called an emergency HOA board meeting in her living room. Her 3 loyal board members listened as she pounded her fist on her immaculate coffee table. We need to take immediate action, she insisted. I propose we hire Critter Control to remove these animals from our neighborhood. The motion passed without discussion, as her motions always did. By afternoon, a pest control truck pulled into Oakwood Heights. The technician, a heavy-set man named Frank, listened to Diane's complaints with a skeptical expression. Ma'am, trapping feral cats isn't as simple as you might think, he explained. They're smart and they learn quick. Plus, what exactly do you want me to do with them once they're caught? That's not my concern, Diane replied coldly. Just remove them from this neighborhood. Frank sighed. County rules say I have to take trapped cats to the shelter. But I called ahead. They're full up and not accepting feral cats right now. That's ridiculous, Diane snapped. They're a government facility, they have to take them. Budget cuts, Frank shrugged. They can barely handle the pets people are giving up. Feral cats are bottom of their list. Despite her protests, Frank set out 6 metal traps baited with tuna in strategic locations around the neighborhood, including 3 in Diane's yard, where most cats had been spotted. He promised to return each morning to check them. What Frank didn't know was that James had been watching from his kitchen window. As soon as the pest control truck left, he sent a text to the Pet Underground group, Operation Cat Freedom begins tonight. Under cover of darkness, James, Raj, and 4 other neighbors made their rounds through Oakwood Heights. They didn't spring the traps, that would be too obvious. Instead, they carefully removed the bait, replacing it with small stones wrapped in paper towels sprayed with tuna juice. The cats would smell food, but find nothing worth entering the trap for. We're not breaking any laws, Robert the lawyer assured them as they worked. We're just making the traps less effective. Their nighttime activities weren't the only resistance forming. Linda and several other members began discreetly placing small bowls of food at the edges of their properties, not enough to create a permanent feeding station, but enough to keep the cats from starving and encourage them to stick around. The first morning, Frank returned to find all traps empty. Strange, he muttered. Usually catch at least 1 or 2 on the first night. Diane was furious. You're doing something wrong, she accused. There were 3 cats on my patio furniture just last night. By the 3rd day, Frank was scratching his head in genuine confusion. Never seen cats this smart before, he told Diane. Maybe they've been trapped before and know to avoid the cages. What no one had anticipated was how quickly the cats would multiply their presence. Word seemed to spread in the feral cat community that Oakwood Heights, particularly Diane's yard, was a safe place with food, water, and minimal human interference. The original 20 or so cats from the warehouse were now joined by strays from surrounding areas. And they were becoming bolder. The battle-scarred Orange Tom that had first discovered Diane's yard now treated her patio as his personal sunbathing spot. When she tried to chase him away with a broom, he stood his ground, hissing until she retreated back inside her house. This is war, Diane whispered, watching through her window as 3 more cats joined the orange leader on her patio. She had no idea that the real battle had only just begun. Diane's morning routine had always been the same: wake at 6 a.m., brew coffee, and enjoy the sunrise from her back patio while planning which neighbor to harass about their imperfect lawn. But for the past week, her routine had been shattered. This morning was no different as she pulled back her curtains and gasped. Her once perfect backyard looked like a scene from a nature documentary. 4 cats lounged on her patio furniture, their fur leaving marks on her cream-colored cushions. 2 more were playing some sort of game around her bird bath, batting at each other and knocking the water onto her carefully laid stone path. And there, in the middle of her award-winning flower bed, the Orange Tom was sprawled contentedly among crushed petunias. "This is absolutely unacceptable," she shouted through the glass. The cats looked up briefly, then returned to their activities as if she'd never spoken. Diane grabbed her phone and started recording, her hand shaking with anger. "This is day 7 of this invasion," she narrated as she panned across her yard. "The pest control company has been completely useless. They've caught exactly 0 cats despite charging me over $500. The doorbell rang, interrupting her documentation. Diane found Frank from Critter Control on her doorstep, looking uncomfortable. "Ms. Prescott, I'm afraid I have some bad news," he said, removing his cap. "We're going to have to suspend our trapping operations." "What? Why?" Diane demanded, her voice rising. "We've received multiple complaints from neighbors and wildlife advocacy groups. Since these are feral cats and not someone's pets, they fall under community wildlife ordinances." Frank shifted his weight nervously. "There's also the issue that we have nowhere to take them even if we catch them. The shelter's still not accepting." Diane slammed the door in his face. Alone in her foyer, she took several deep breaths before marching to her home office. If the professionals wouldn't help, she'd handle this herself. Over the next 3 days, Diane tried everything. She installed a motion-activated sprinkler system that mainly succeeded in turning her yard into a muddy mess. She scattered citrus peels, which gardening websites promised would repel cats, but instead attracted squirrels. She even played high-pitched sounds through outdoor speakers, which only resulted in noise complaints from her neighbors. Meanwhile, the situation worsened. The cats seemed to be specifically targeting her prized possessions. Her koi pond, once home to fish she paid hundreds of dollars for, became a feline fishing hole. One by one, her expensive Japanese koi disappeared, with only scales and fins left as evidence. Her garden, which had won Best in Neighborhood 3 years running, was now a communal litter box. The smell on hot afternoons was unbearable, forcing her to keep her windows closed and air conditioning running constantly. The breaking point came when Diane discovered her imported patio cushions shredded beyond repair. She'd special ordered the fabric from Italy, and now it hung in tatters, with stuffing blowing across her lawn like indoor snow. That night, unable to sleep due to the yowling of what sounded like a cat fight directly under her bedroom window, Diane installed security cameras. The footage she reviewed the next morning left her speechless. At least 15 different cats visited her property overnight. They came and went freely, as if her yard was some sort of feline social club. Worst of all, the cameras revealed something suspicious. The cats seemed to avoid other houses entirely. They would walk across the street, slink through a hedge, or take significant detours rather than cut through certain yards. Yet they flocked to hers like it was catnip central. "This can't be coincidence," Diane whispered, rewatching the footage for the 3rd time. Dark circles had formed under her eyes, and her usually perfect hair was unbrushed. Someone is doing this on purpose. She spent the day reviewing her footage, taking notes on cat movements, and creating a map of the neighborhood with red X's marking where cats were and weren't going. By evening, she'd convinced herself there was an organized conspiracy against her. Trembling with exhaustion and anger, Diane composed an email to all Oakwood Heights residents calling for another emergency HOA meeting. "This feral cat situation requires immediate community action," she wrote, her overuse of capital letters betraying her frayed nerves. "Attendance is mandatory. Absence will result in an automatic $250 fine per household." As she hit send, the orange Tom jumped onto her windowsill outside, staring at her through the glass with those knowing yellow eyes. For just a moment, Diane could have sworn he was smiling. As the meeting broke up, people avoided making eye contact with Diane, who remained frozen at the podium, staring at her useless photos and proposals. The orange tomcat, as if aware of the proceedings, sat outside the community center window, calmly washing his battle-scarred face. 2 weeks after the disastrous HOA meeting, a large moving truck appeared in front of Diane's house. Neighbors peeked through curtains as men carried furniture and boxes into the vehicle. Diane supervised from her driveway, jumping nervously whenever a cat crossed her line of vision, which happened frequently, as the feral colony now seemed to consider her yard their permanent headquarters. "She's really leaving," Linda whispered to Tom as they pretended to check their mail. "I never thought anything would drive her out." The moving truck wasn't the only surprise. A young couple arrived that afternoon, meeting briefly with Diane before she handed over a set of keys. As twilight fell, Diane climbed into her luxury sedan without saying goodbye to anyone and drove away from Oakwood Heights, leaving behind only a for rent sign in her front yard. She couldn't sell the house, Robert explained at the hastily called Pet Underground meeting that evening. No one wants to buy a property with a feral cat infestation, so she's renting it out while she lives in that new high-rise condo downtown. What about the new tenants? Rage asked. Do they know what they're getting into? James smiled. They're fully aware. They're friends of my cousin, both veterinary students looking for an affordable place to live while they finish school. I might have mentioned the cat situation before they applied. The room erupted in laughter and applause. What had started as a desperate resistance group was now transforming into something more like a neighborhood friendship circle. With Diane gone, the next official HOA meeting had record attendance. The first order of business: electing a new board. To no one's surprise, James, the quiet software engineer who had organized their rebellion, was unanimously elected president. Linda became vice president, Robert the treasurer, and Ethel, to her delight, was named secretary. First motion as president, James announced, is to officially reverse the pet ban and establish reasonable, humane pet guidelines for our community. The vote was unanimous. Cheers and hugs followed, with many residents rushing home immediately afterward to call family members keeping their beloved pets and share the good news. Over the next few months, pets gradually returned to Oakwood Heights. Dogs once again played in yards, cats sunbathed in windows, and children's guinea pigs and hamsters came out of hiding. The atmosphere throughout the neighborhood transformed from one of fear and secrecy to open celebration of their animal companions. As for the feral cats, they presented an unexpected opportunity for community building. At James's suggestion, the HOA partnered with a local animal rescue group that practiced TNR, trap, neuter, return. Volunteers humanely trapped the cats, had them spayed or neutered at a discounted rate, then released them back where they were found. This prevents the colony from growing, explained the rescue director at a community workshop. Over time, the population will naturally decrease. Several residents, including Linda and the Hendersons, took training courses on feral cat management. They learned to build simple winter shelters and maintain feeding stations away from homes. The vet students renting Diane's house proved invaluable, offering free health checks for any cats they could safely handle. Most surprisingly, some of the younger cats and kittens from the colony, those still adaptable enough for domestication, found homes within the neighborhood. The vet students socialized them gradually, and one by one, families opened their doors to these former ferals. 1 year after Diane's departure, Oakwood Heights held its first annual pet festival in the community park. Dogs paraded in silly costumes, children showcased their small pets, and adoption booths featured cats from the original colony who were now ready for indoor life. During the festival, James received an interesting piece of news from a friend living downtown. "You'll never believe this," he told the group gathered around the grill. "Diane's been elected to the board at her new building. Her first act as board member. A building-wide ban on bird feeders on balconies because they're unsightly and attract vermin." Everyone shook their heads, some things never changed. As they laughed together, a now familiar orange tomcat watched from the edge of the park. His torn ear had healed, thanks to antibiotics from the vet students, and his coat shone healthier than ever. Like the other community cats, he wore a small green tag on his collar indicating he'd been through the TNR program. In a final twist of irony, the last 2 kittens of the colony, both orange like their presumed father, were adopted by the vet students living in Diane's house. They named them Prescott and Karen, ensuring that even if the real Diane never returned to Oakwood Heights, her legacy would live on in an unexpected and much more welcome for